Some moments, they never leave you. They latch onto your soul, wrap around your thoughts like a shadow, creeping into the quietest moments of your life. And what I saw that day, I can never unsee. It shattered everything I believed in. For the longest time, I told myself that I had a good life. Not perfect, but good enough. A loving husband. A home that felt safe. A routine that kept everything in place. And then, in one split second, it all crumbled. I caught him. I caught Donald, my husband's son, doing something so shocking, so unforgivable, that it left me standing there, frozen. Heart pounding. Mouth dry. Mind racing a mile a minute. I wish I could tell you that I screamed. That I confronted him right then and there. That I stormed out, packed my bags, and never looked back. But I didn't. I stood there, rooted to the ground, feeling the air being sucked out of my lungs. Because deep down, in a part of me I didn't even want to acknowledge. I knew. I knew the signs had been there all along. Small things. A look held just a second too long. A touch that lingered. Words that, at the time, I convinced myself were harmless. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? I always trusted my husband. And I adored his son, Donald. He was like family to me. I had watched him grow up, turn into this confident, charming young man. Never in a million years did I think. Never did I think I would see him like that. Never did I think that for even 1 second. I would feel something in return. Before I tell you everything, before I share the darkest, most shameful moment of my life, I want you to do something for me. Make sure to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga and turn on the notification bell now. Because stories like this, real, raw, and painful, need to be told. And I promise you, this is one you won't forget. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that my life was normal. Not exciting, not miserable, just normal. I was married to James, a man who, on paper, seemed like the perfect husband. Stable. Reliable. A good provider. But in reality, James was a ghost. Not in the literal sense, of course. He was there, physically. He came home every night. He sat at the dinner table. He slept beside me. But his presence was like a faded imprint of the man I had once loved. He had a way of making me feel invisible without even trying. Conversations became short, transactional. Did you pay the bill? What time is the meeting? Can you grab groceries? Touch, intimacy, it had become an afterthought. A formality, if it happened at all. I can't remember the last time he looked at me, really looked at me. And the worst part? I had stopped expecting him to. Loneliness is a funny thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It's slow, creeping, a gradual hollowing out of your heart until one day, you wake up and realize you've been starving. Starving for attention. For warmth. For the kind of touch that reminds you that you're still alive. And in that emptiness, I told myself that this was just life. That marriage wasn't supposed to be passionate forever. That I was being selfish for wanting more. So, I buried it. I smiled at the right moments. Played the role of the devoted wife. Kept the house spotless, made sure dinner was ready, stayed quiet when James was too tired to talk. I became background noise in my own life. And then, there was Donald. James's son from his first marriage. He was everything James used to be before life and responsibility dulled him. Charming. Confident. Playful in a way that felt effortless. I had watched him grow up, seen him evolve from a quiet, observant boy into a man who carried himself with an undeniable presence. He wasn't a kid anymore, and yet, in my mind, he had always been James's son first. My stepson second. I never saw him as anything else. Until the day he started seeing me differently. It was subtle at first. So subtle that I convinced myself it was nothing. The way his eyes lingered on me a second too long. The casual, almost teasing compliments about my hair, my dress, things James hadn't noticed in years. The way his fingers would graze my hand when he passed me something, the way he leaned in just a little too close when we spoke. Tiny, insignificant moments. That's what I told myself. Until they weren't. The house we lived in, if you looked at it from the outside, you'd think it was perfect. A beautiful suburban home with a well-manicured lawn, a picture-perfect family. But inside, there were cracks. Hairline fractures no one else could see. I spent my days moving through that house like a ghost, just like my husband. But Donald? Donald saw me. For the first time in years. I felt seen. And I never imagined that something so innocent could become so dangerous. I never imagined he would look at me that way. And I never imagined that I would feel something in return. It started on a day that should have been ordinary. The sun was high, the sky was cloudless, and the ocean stretched endlessly before us. A perfect day for a family trip to the beach. James had planned it, or at least, he had agreed to it after I suggested it for the third time. He had been distant, buried in work, more consumed by his phone than by the idea of spending time together. I told myself that this was normal, that this was just who he was, that it was fine. And for the first hour, it was. James, as expected, had his laptop set up under an umbrella, answering emails between half-hearted sips of his drink. I had stopped trying to pull him away from work years ago. So, I took a deep breath, kicked off my sandals, and tried to enjoy the day. Donald was already in the water, his body cutting through the waves with effortless ease. He was laughing, carefree, the kind of energy that made the world around him feel lighter. And then, at some point, his eyes met mine. It was nothing at first. Just a passing glance. A moment of acknowledgement. But something in the way he looked at me made my breath hitch. I turned away quickly, brushing it off. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just overanalyzing. And then, hey, you're not just going to sit there, are you? His voice was teasing, lighthearted. His grin was infectious. Before I could say anything, he was beside me, shaking water from his hair, droplets splashing onto my skin. I laughed, swatting at him playfully, but the sound that left my lips felt strange. When was the last time I laughed like that? I don't swim, I said, using the excuse I always did. He raised an eyebrow. Not even to cool off? I'm fine, I insisted, stretching out on the towel. All right, but at least let me help you out with something. Before I could ask what he meant, he reached for the bottle of sunscreen beside me. And then, his hands were on my back. It was innocent. It should have been. His palms were warm, smoothing over my shoulders, the curve of my spine. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just helping. But the air between us shifted. It was subtle, the way his fingers lingered just a second too long, the way his breath hitched slightly when my skin shivered under his touch. I felt my pulse quicken. This was wrong. But I didn't move. And when he finally pulled away, I told myself it was fine. That I was overthinking. That my mind was playing tricks on me. That it was just sunscreen. Right? That night, I caught him staring. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't expecting it. But when I turned around, there he was, standing in the doorway of the beach house, watching me. His gaze was unreadable. Dark. Heavy. And for the first time, I didn't know what to do. I should have looked away. But I didn't. Something inside me shifted that night. A slow, quiet realization that whatever was happening between us had already begun. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar bed, the hum of the ocean outside, the occasional creak of the beach house settling in the wind. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could still feel the ghost of his hands on my skin. Still hear the unspoken weight of that stare from the doorway. I tossed and turned, my mind spinning in directions I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Why was I even thinking about this? It was disgusting, wasn't it? This was James's son. I was his stepmother. The lines couldn't have been clearer. There was no gray area, no excuse. And yet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. James had stopped looking at me long ago. But Donald? Donald's eyes followed me in a way that made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just a part of the furniture, blending into the background of my own life. I hated myself for noticing, but I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I told myself I was imagining things. That the beach, the moonlight, the exhaustion, maybe they had made me misinterpret what had happened. He was just a boy. Just being polite. Just Just what? I tried to push it down, to lock the feeling away in some part of me that wouldn't betray me. But once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. And once you've felt something, you can't pretend it never happened. The days that followed should have been normal, but they weren't. I started noticing everything. The way his glances lingered just a heartbeat too long. The way his fingers would graze mine when passing something across the table. The way his body leaned a little closer than necessary when we were in the same space. It wasn't deliberate. Or at least, I told myself it wasn't. And maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was just overanalyzing things, looking for something that wasn't there. Because the alternative? The alternative meant acknowledging that there was something there. And that was too dangerous. I started avoiding him. Or at least, I tried to. I avoided eye contact. I busied myself with my phone, with chores, with conversations that kept me on the opposite side of the room. But even as I avoided him, I found myself waiting for the next time he would acknowledge me, waiting for the next brush of his fingers, the next playful smirk, the next stolen glance. And when it didn't come, when he was distant, when he acted as if nothing had changed, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. Disappointment. And that realization? It made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to understand. It didn't stop. It should have. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining things. That if I just ignored it, if I acted as if I didn't feel the heat of his gaze, it would disappear. But it didn't. And then, the texts from Donald started. It began as nothing small, meaningless messages. Hey, are you home? Did you need help with anything? Harmless. But then, harmless turned into something else. You looked really nice today. I hesitated before responding. I typed and deleted my reply at least 3 times before settling on, thanks. That's sweet of you. I should have left it at that. But I didn't. The next message came a day later from Donald. James doesn't know how lucky he is. I froze. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have shut it down right then. I should have blocked his number, deleted the messages, ignored him completely. But instead, I sat there, rereading the words over and over again. And I felt something I didn't want to feel. Wanted. Noticed. Special. I started watching him when I thought he wasn't looking. But he was always looking. Every glance, every moment where our eyes met across the room, it felt like a secret that only the two of us understood. And then there were the touches. Small. Subtle. A brush of fingers when he handed me something. A hand at the small of my back as he passed by. It should have meant nothing. But it meant everything. Then, there was the night we drove home together. James had asked Donald to drop me off after dinner. He had some late meeting, some excuse to stay behind. I didn't even argue anymore. The car ride was quiet at first. The hum of the road, the faint sound of music playing through the speakers. And then, out of nowhere, I think about you, Donald said. My fingers tightened around the hem of my dress. What? I think about you, he repeated, voice steady. More than I should. I swallowed hard. Donald, we can't, I know. A humorless chuckle. But that doesn't change anything, does it? I didn't answer. Because he was right. It didn't change anything. And when his hand rested just a little too close to mine on the center console, I didn't move away. Not right away. I don't know what I was expecting after that night. Maybe I thought it would be the end of it. That we had crossed an invisible line, and now we would both retreat, pretend it never happened. But tension doesn't just disappear. It lingers. It builds. And one night, when we were alone in the house, it finally broke. It was late. James was out of town for work. The house was quiet, empty except for the two of us. I should have gone to bed. I should have stayed in my room, closed the door, locked it if I had to. But instead, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the glass of wine in my hand, listening to the sound of his footsteps approaching. And then, suddenly, he was there. Standing too close. Looking at me like he had been holding something back for too long. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. Because in that moment, every excuse, every justification, every reason why this was wrong, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the silence between us, thick and heavy with something we could never take back. And I should have walked away. I should have stopped then. But I didn't. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was both of us at the same time, pulled toward each other by something we didn't want to name. All I know is that 1 second, there was space between us, space that had been shrinking for weeks, space that had been bending under the weight of something inevitable. And then, there wasn't. There was no space at all. His lips were on mine. His hands were in my hair, gripping, pulling. And my body, traitorous, desperate, moved against his like it had been waiting for this moment all along. I should have pushed him away. I should have stopped it the second it started. But the truth? The ugly, shameful, undeniable truth? I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I felt alive. It was reckless. It was selfish. It was wrong. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the heat of his skin, the way he breathed my name like it was something sacred, the way he wanted me in a way no one had in so long. I let it happen. I let him take what should have never been his to take. And I gave myself to something that would destroy me. It was over in seconds. But the damage? The damage was eternal. The moment our bodies separated, reality crashed down around me like a wave that had been waiting, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to drown me the second I let my guard down. I staggered back, breathless, my hands shaking. Donald was staring at me, chest rising and falling, lips parted like he wanted to say something but didn't know what. And then, silence. Heavy. Suffocating. A silence so thick it felt like a third person in the room, standing between us, whispering the one thing we both knew to be true. We had just destroyed everything. I pressed a hand to my mouth, my stomach twisting, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might tear through my ribs. What have I done? I whispered. Donald took a step toward me. I took a step back. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt like I was falling, plummeting into something dark and endless. I turned and ran down the hall, ran into my room, slamming the door behind me, locking it. As if a locked door could undo what had just happened. As if I could lock away the truth. I pressed my forehead against the wood, squeezing my eyes shut. Tears burned at the corners, but I refused to let them fall. Because crying meant acknowledging it. And I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I thought I could pretend it never happened. I thought if I buried it deep enough, if I locked it away in the darkest corner of my mind, it would disappear. That the guilt wouldn't sink into my skin like a stain I could never wash away. That I could go back to being the woman I was before. But secrets. Secrets have a way of surfacing. The morning after, I avoided him. I woke up early, long before James stirred beside me, and moved through the house like a ghost. I made coffee. I folded laundry. I busied myself with anything that would keep me from thinking about what I had done. What we had done. And for a moment, I convinced myself that if I just kept moving, if I just acted normal, then everything would be fine. But then I felt it. His eyes, watching me. I didn't have to turn around to know he was there, standing in the doorway, lingering. I could feel it, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken tension stretching between us like an invisible thread, pulling tight. I kept my hands busy, pretending not to notice, pretending I didn't feel my pulse quicken, pretending I wasn't suffocating under the pressure of his silence. But he didn't speak. Not right away. And when I finally risked a glance in his direction, my breath caught in my throat. Because the way he looked at me, it was different now. Possessive. Like he had tasted something forbidden, and now he wanted more. James noticed. Of course, he did. How could he not? At first, it was subtle. He would glance between us at the dinner table, his brow furrowing slightly, his fingers drumming against his glass as if sensing a rhythm he couldn't quite place. Then, the question started. Is everything okay? You seem different lately. I would smile, force out a laugh, tell him I was just tired. And he would nod, accepting it. Because James, despite everything, trusted me. The guilt of that realization nearly swallowed me whole. But Donald didn't make it easy. He didn't hide. He didn't pretend. If anything, he became bolder. He would brush against me when he walked past, his fingers barely grazing my arm, but enough to ignite. He would stare too long, hold my gaze across the room, smirk when he saw me flinch. And the worst part? I let it happen. I didn't stop him. Not because I wanted it, God, I wanted to undo it, to take it all back. But because I didn't know how. Because stopping him meant confronting it. And confronting it meant facing what I had done. So, I played pretend. I pretended not to notice. I pretended not to hear the way his voice dropped lower when he spoke to me. I pretended that every inch of my skin didn't crawl with the memory of his touch. I pretended that James's eyes weren't watching me more closely now. I pretended until pretending wasn't enough. Until the moment I realized someone was watching. I don't know when I first felt it. That creeping sensation. That unsettling awareness. Like eyes lingering just beyond my line of sight. It started as nothing, just a passing thought, an unease I couldn't name. But then it grew. I would be in the kitchen, washing dishes, and feel it. I would be walking down the hall alone and feel it. At night, when the house was silent, I would wake up with my heart pounding, certain that I wasn't alone. Did James suspect? Had he seen something? Or was it all in my head? I didn't know. And that terrified me more than anything. Because secrets never stay buried. Not forever. And the deeper you try to hide them, the louder they start to scream. I thought the guilt would dull over time. That if I ignored it long enough, it would shrink, fade into the background like an old bruise, lingering, but not painful. But guilt doesn't work that way. It doesn't dissolve. It festers. And with every passing day, it grew heavier. Like a stone in my chest, pressing harder and harder, making it difficult to breathe. Because I had destroyed everything. My marriage. My morality. Myself. I couldn't escape it. No matter how much I tried to push it down, it was always there. I would be folding laundry, mindlessly going through the motions, and then suddenly I'd feel it. A flash of memory. The way his hands felt on my skin. The heat of his breath against my neck. The way I had let it happen. And the worst part? The moment I had kissed him back. I would see it again and again, like a cruel loop on repeat in my mind, making me sicker every time. What kind of woman does this? What kind of wife betrays her husband like this? What have I become? I started avoiding mirrors. Because when I looked at my own reflection, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She wasn't me. She was someone else. Someone unfaithful. Someone broken. Someone I didn't want to be. But no matter how much I wanted to undo it, no matter how much I wanted to wake up and find that it had all been a bad dream, it was real. And it was never going away. Confess. The thought kept creeping in. Over and over. Tell James. Tell him the truth. Rip off the bandage. Accept whatever happens next. Maybe he would yell. Maybe he would hate me. Maybe he would leave. Maybe I deserved that. Maybe I needed to be punished. Because living with this secret, carrying it like a dead weight on my back, was becoming unbearable. But then, just as quickly as the thought came, another followed. Bury it. Lock it away. What good would telling him do? It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo what had happened. It would only break him. Break our marriage. Break everything. So, I told myself to stay quiet. To carry it alone. To live with it. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Because this wasn't living. This was suffocating. And every day that passed, I felt myself sinking deeper. Drowning. Choking on the weight of my own choices. And I knew. One way or another, this secret wasn't going to stay buried forever. If you've ever made a mistake you can't take back, tell me, how do you live with it? Do you wake up every morning and pretend it never happened? Do you smile through the guilt? Act as if nothing is wrong, as if you're not carrying something so heavy that it threatens to crush you every second of the day? Do you learn to live with the regret, let it become a part of you, like a scar you never wanted but can't erase? Or do you confess? Do you tear your life apart with your own hands and accept the consequences, no matter how painful? Because that's where I am now. Standing at a crossroads, knowing that no matter which way I turn, there's no going back. Do I tell my husband? Do I watch his face shatter when he realizes the woman he trusted, the woman he chose to spend his life with, has betrayed him in the worst way possible? Do I break him the way I've already broken myself? Or do I take this secret to my grave? Do I bury it so deep that it never sees the light of day? Do I pretend, for the rest of my life, that it never happened? That I never let myself slip? That I never let myself fall? I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can live with the truth. But I don't know if I can live with the lie either. Tell me, what would you do? If you've ever been here, if you've ever felt this kind of guilt, this kind of regret, tell me in the comments. Because I need to know. I need to know how people survive this. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unfiltered, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because the truth is that stories like mine, they happen more often than you think. And sometimes, they don't end the way you expect. One mistake, one moment of weakness. And now, I might lose everything. I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought I would be that woman. But loneliness. Loneliness is a dangerous thing. It sneaks up on you, whispers in your ear, convinces you that you're missing something vital, something you need. And before you know it, you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Before you know it, you've ruined yourself. Be careful who you let into your heart. Be careful what you convince yourself is harmless. Because some mistakes you never recover from.